that would, if everyone could, except for our panelists, remain on mute throughout the first part of the presentation. We are going to have space at the end for questions. But if you have questions as the presentation is going along, please put it in the chat so that we can keep track of them. And also at some point, because we have so many people on the line, and we will be sharing a slide deck, you may want to put your self off camera because depending on what your bandwidth is or how great your high speed is, it might slow down your participation in the meeting. So with that being said, we have four people panelists tonight. We have Greg, Joan, Lewis, and Anne this evening. They each come with a different, slightly different viewpoint of the topic, so that we hope to be able to give everyone like a 360 view of IDAs and public subsidies for what is private projects, really. And we're going to start with Greg. He comes to us from Good Jobs First. And he is a nationally recognized expert on public subsidies, and according to Michael, second to none in representing the public interests in these things. So Greg, if you want to get going, that would be great.
Thanks. I'm going to share my screen and I hope it works. Let's see if it does. Can people see my slide?
Soon, yes.
Great. So I've been asked to talk about the role and powers of IDAs in New York State, and I'll rip through this quickly. We're 25 years old. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan group. We work with people like yourselves and other nonprofit groups, labor unions, journalists, public officials. We have a very robust website with lots of data and report card studies on it. We have 6 unique databases, including a lot of data from New York, and we testify and train all the time. I should also add that we have been working on IDA issues for a very long time. We had a project in New York City called Good Jobs New York from 1999 until 2016. Some people may know Bettina Damiani from that work. And so we're very versed in the problems and the solutions for New York City and New York State IDAs. So there's 4 kinds of subsidies that IDAs can give out, and they cover all the local forms of taxes or fees that companies would normally pay to support local public services. They involve property tax exemptions, sales tax exemptions, cheap loans, that is lower interest rate loans, and a waiver of the mortgage recordation tax. And I'll explain each of those. So the property tax exemption is in the form of a kind of a strange ownership workaround. Like quite a few other states, New York State uses what we call a constitutional workaround to give taxes to individual taxpayers in a way that would normally be violative of your state constitution. And they do that by taking ownership or a leasehold interest in the property of the company getting subsidized. So that legally, technically, the property is akin to like a library or a school that's off the tax rolls because it's not technically a private property on the tax rolls. The IDA may ameliorate or reduce the amount of lost revenue by negotiating what's called a payment in lieu of taxes or a pilot on top of that. But normally that's a very small percentage of what the company would normally pay in property taxes. So it's effectively a very deep discount on the normal property tax. And that ownership stake gives the IDA power. I would argue dormant powers that very few of them use, and I'll explain that in a minute. On the sales tax side, it means that during the construction or rehabilitation phase, the company doesn't pay sales taxes on the building materials or the machinery or equipment used to construct or equip the facility. That's also a big deal, obviously, because normally you'd pay the sales tax rate of 7 to 8.5%, depending on the local rates on all those purchases. On the interest rate reduction side, some deals also involve what's called industrial revenue bonds, or financing associated with helping pay for the construction of the facility. And again, because this is technically a public structure getting built for tax purposes, the bonds can be of two different kinds of tax advantage bonds. One's called triple tax exempt, in which literally no level of government can tax the interest payments paid to the people who buy the bonds, or taxable, so-called taxable bonds, which are federally taxable, but not taxable by New York State or by any local entity in New York State. That means that the loans are cheap. Typically, the spread would be about a 25% difference. So if the market rate for a borrowing was 8%, a triple tax exempt bond might go for 6%. That's a big cut in the cost of money. And then there's the exemption on the mortgage recordation tax, which is between 7.75% and 0.5% on the recording of a mortgage. And again, because this is an IDA owned facility or IDA's leasehold facility, that gets waived. So that structure gives the IDAs power that they seldom use, because it means that really the facility is quasi publicly owned, right? And it means that if the IDA so chose, it could do things like impose job quality standards, that is wage or healthcare or full-time employment or direct employment, et cetera, standards. It could give a preference for local hiring. You can't mandate local hiring, but you can set up preferential first source local hiring structures. You could have MWBE set-asides, that is minority women business-owned enterprise set-asides for contracting during the construction phase. You could favor local businesses, local incumbent businesses in tenancy spaces if it's a facility that's going to lease commercial space. And you could also require the use of green building standards and other pro-environmental carbon reduction technology in the construction and then the operation and maintenance of the facility. You could also, and this is certainly what we proved in New York City, you can win procedural reforms that make it easier for your coalition to crawl inside the beast, right? You can, if the IDA so chooses, it can mandate advanced disclosure. The city council could mandate advanced disclosure of every docket, including all the associated materials. And there may be some there now, I don't know, but in New York, there were none when we first started. It was a big deal when we finally got them. You could have an email list for people to sign up to automatically get those notices. And for big projects, especially if they're going to be big land use implications, you could require that hearings be held in the neighborhood near the site affected at times and places friendly for the attendance of working family members. And I should just remind you, in addition to all these local tax breaks, your state has a raft of subsidies that get laid on top of many of these deals to reduce the company's corporate income taxes, right? Because the state taxes corporate profits or corporate income. There are 10 for manufacturers alone, 9 for real estate, and on down the list. So there's many forms of income tax advantages for new economic activity in your state, as well as all the local property sales and mortgage and interest rate subsidies that I laid out. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention to you that schools are the biggest losers, right? Schools are the biggest, most costly local public service in your state, just like every other state. And they are still dependent on property taxes to a great degree. Property taxes remain the biggest source of revenue for public education in your state and like many others, although increasingly this money also comes from the state general fund. But that means that schools lose the most when IDAs abate those property taxes. And of course, then it interacts with the state equalization formula. But we released a study this time last year proving that school districts statewide in New York State lose $1.8 billion to tax abatements. That's according to the school district's own officially reported disclosures mandated by a big government accounting reform that we at Good Jobs First, together with hundreds of people and individuals that and groups that we organized to comment, won in an obscure rules comment fight 8 years ago, or 9 years ago now in 2015. This is the lineup of groups now pushing for bills that were advocated at this press conference. So the solution, that's Senator Sean Ryan from Buffalo in the front, and Assemblyman Harry Bronson is out of the picture. They're co-sponsoring a bill that would in the future say that IDAs can no longer abate that share of the property tax that would normally otherwise go to schools. This would be a very big, important reform and a massive, excellent precedent for your state, because very few states effectively do that, effectively completely shield schools from property tax abatements. And there's very wide support for this bill in the state. Here's the official list of endorsing organizations. So you can see it's everybody in K-12 education, from management to labor. Lots of the classic reform groups involved in equity, like the Alliance for Quality Education and the Network for Public Education, as well as all the good government groups, the Council of Churches, Strong Economy for All, Reinvent Albany, Fiscal Policy Institute. Everybody and her sister is supporting that bill, and I hope you will too. That's my contact information, and I look forward to the Q&A when we have the other speakers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Greg. That was very informative and brief and
we
so
specialize in that.
thank you very much. All right, our next speaker is going to be Joan. Joan is currently a trustee for the village of Portchester. She has an extensive background in advocacy for our community, and many of us in New Aurora first met Joan when she came on our environmental racist trolley tour, when she was the director for then Congressman Mondale Jones. So Joan, if you want to come off of mute and start.
I think I am off mute. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you and good evening. Thank you to New Aurora for the invitation. My name is Joan Grangenois-Thomas, and as Lisa mentioned, I am currently a trustee in my second term for the village of Portchester. And you know, just sort of a brief story behind that. I ran for office specifically because of my activism around affordable housing in Portchester. Particularly having to do with a large project at the United Hospital, a former site of the United Hospital that is in Portchester, and some of you may be familiar with that. So I'm coming at this from a couple of, wearing a couple of 2-3 different hats, starting out as an activist and then becoming part of the process in terms of municipal elected office, and also as a resident. And so in listening to Greg's presentation, there were just so many things there that resonated for me. And what I can say is that from my perspective, working with our IDA here in Portchester, I began to learn about IDAs from that point on. I had not known really what the work of the IDA was, and I think that there are very many in my community and in other communities where IDAs exist that also aren't very familiar and aware of the power and the strength of IDAs, in a way that, the power and the strength that they have using tax, revenue, using our taxes in order to fund the work that they do. I think it is incredibly important that as residents and as taxpayers, we become, very familiar and aware. And so I was certainly glad to see those requirements about public noticing in their neighborhoods, in neighborhoods where work was about to begin, and other things that IDAs should be doing to make their work transparent. I think that's certainly the number one issue that folks are not familiar with, because there is not a lot of transparency necessarily, and folks have to dig deep in order to find the information that they'd like to have. I believe that IDAs, certainly in Portchester's case, we talked about affordable housing and the IDA's role in supporting that, and it's very difficult to see them as supporting affordable housing when they have supported sort of the rule of thumb that we know to be true in Westchester, which is a 10% set aside for affordable housing at the area median income, or AMI. And as many of you may know, the AMI is for Westchester County as a whole, which, if you understand Westchester County, you know that that is a very high threshold. And so that doesn't work, certainly not for the majority of residents here in Portchester. Average median income in Portchester is approximately $52,000 a year for a family of four. Area median income based on Westchester standards is closer to mid $90,000 a year for a family of four. And so that doesn't work for many of us, even at 60 to 80% AMI. I believe that an IDA can only be as effective and efficient as the leadership in that community. IDAs take its cue from municipal leadership in terms of a stated vision and goal for a community. And again, if there is not that leadership there, I think it's very difficult for an IDA to make sure that they are, following along in the goals and the vision of the municipal leaders. And so it is incumbent upon us to really plant that flag in terms of what we'd like to see in our community and how we'd like to see our IDAs perform. Additionally, I would say that there are some others. I know that Senator Skoufis is working on some legislation around IDAs that I think will certainly make them a lot more transparent and accountable, which is certainly another aspect of IDAs, which I think can be lacking. And again, using taxpayer dollars in order to do the work that they do, they are crucial in terms of, economic development. But at the same time, the level of transparency and accountability is crucial, particularly in the area of clawbacks. When you talk about the pilots that are offered and the different community benefits that might be offered, whether it is set-asides for, local tenant occupancy for businesses or using MBWE businesses, we need to look very closely in terms of what those clawbacks are. To make sure that if a developer is not adhering to those policies or ordinances, that those clawbacks have teeth, essentially, and that there is some accountability that is presented to developers should they not adhere to the policies that are set by the UTEP, or the Universal Tax Exempt Policy, which is sort of the checkmark of things that a developer would need to provide in order to be able to meet the standard for gaining a pilot, which we heard was a payment in lieu of taxes. So there are, I think, certainly for me, a variety of ways, again, Greg's presentation was really illuminating, and a variety of ways in which I think we can come back now to our IDA here in Portchester, and just sort of do a review to see if these things are in place. And, I would greatly encourage all of us, if there is that role that we can play, to, question and ask questions about the IDA, to ask them to present to your community about what it is that they do, attend a Board of Trustee meeting or a City Council meeting and give a 101 about what it is that they're doing, so that we can, encourage that transparency and encourage that understanding by residents as to what the IDA does and how they're playing a role in this quasi-public use of funds. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop there, Lisa, to see if, how you want to move forward with.
Okay, we're going to take questions at the end, but people are putting their questions in the chat, which is great, and we encourage you to continue doing that. But thank you, Joan. That was
Cool.
very, very helpful and very inspiring as well. Our next speaker is Luis Sanchez from IBEW. His region covers not only Westchester but Rockland, and he is going to be here to talk to us about labor and the importance of having a labor voice with these IDAs. So, Luis, please.
Yes, thank you. So, like she said, my name is Lou Sanchez. We do. We don't cover Rockland, but we cover Westchester County and all of New York City. So that's the 5 boroughs. Joan said a lot of interesting and important things she did mention, the history a little bit of IDAs, right? So, and I wanted to mention that, IDAs were created in 1969. And if you look at the history there, it was created for 2 sole purposes. One is to create good jobs, and the other was for affordable housing, right? And there's other ones like 421A abatement in New York City, also created to create affordable housing. So we kind of got away from that, right? We're building all this market, they call market share. I'm not sure anyone on this call could afford it. I know I can't afford some of these apartments that they're building now, but they've really gotten away for what it was intended. Today I want to speak to you about the jobs portion of that. I would say in New Rochelle, we probably had 20 years ago, we probably had over 1,000 union members. And this is just, I'm not talking about the other trades. This is just the electrical trades. We're probably down to maybe 200 to 300 members in the city of New Rochelle. And, those numbers go down in Yonkers and in White Plains and throughout the county. And it's mainly because they're not using local labor anymore. They're bringing in a workforce, a very vulnerable workforce, I would say. Some are documented, some are undocumented, and it's just a sad thing that you see happening here. My members, they come from nothing. They made their way to the middle class. They bought houses, and a lot of them have moved out of New Rochelle because of the lack of work opportunities there. So, some of the work that I've done, we've been with Joan over in Portchester. That's probably where I first got my feet wet, in Portchester, going to those Portchester IDA meetings several years ago. But I've been to the Yonkers IDA, the county IDA, and, there's 7 IDAs in total in Westchester County, just so you understand that. Yonkers, New Rochelle, Portchester, Mount Pleasant, Mount Vernon, Peekskill, and then the county. The county has its own IDA, but the county kind of covers White Plains, Greenberg area, right? So we were successful 2 years ago negotiating with County Executive George Latimer and his crew for better labor policies. And we were really happy with them. We were hoping to promote that, but unfortunately, they've been in place for 2 years and they have not created really any union jobs or good paying jobs. And the main reason is what Joan touched on earlier, the lack of clawbacks. There's just no clawbacks. So you have policies in place, and we're having conversations with the county exec's office and like, okay, these projects are not non-compliant with the local labor policies. And, so they're at a position where now what? Now what do we do? So they need stronger clawbacks. That's where we are with the county executive. We're currently negotiating, if they ask me my opinion, they should take back the benefits. Take back the benefits. They're not going to hire people locally here. They're going to, bus people in from, out of state. Then don't give them our benefits here. So we've seen, unfortunately, I don't come today with any good news. There have been several failed attempts on IDA reform on a state level and on a local level, and very, very few wins. But one win that we got a couple of years ago was the labor representative. We were able to convince the county executive because the state controller's office, Tom DiNapoli's office, it's in their mission statement. In their mission statement, they want to see a labor representative on all IDAs, and there isn't any. There's no representation from labor. So we were able to get someone appointed, my colleague from Local 3 IBEW, Richie McSpadden, who sits on the county IDA and has been very helpful, but still lack of transparency and lack of clawbacks there have not given us too many jobs. And I will leave it there if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Lou. Again, sobering. So our last speaker, before we open it up for questions is Ann Zahner. She is a 35-year resident of New Rochelle, and she researches and writes for Newer News and has been really helpful with when we did our trolley tour, our environmental racism trolley tour, as well as our Earth Day walkabout in Pugsley Hollow. She's semi-retired now after a 30-year career as an executive and banker, and she's coming to us over the phone because she's in Great Britain and she does not have good internet there. So Anne, if you want to come off mute.
Good evening. I'm happy to be on the New Roar Monday Night Talk. And I've listened very closely to our speakers, and I want to say that New Rochelle's IDA embodies all of the aspects that were summarized by Joan and Greg. I can't speak so much to the jobs, but I would like to summarize the benefits that have been provided by the city's IDA for 9 projects. And they're the ones that are the tallest and that are situated right in our downtown, in order to give a sense of the magnitude of the subsidies that our IDA has been providing. And I want to, since over the phone and I don't have a slide to summarize this, I'm going to group it into 2 categories. And I call it the tale of 2 cities. One category is the 6 high-rise luxury and market rate apartments that are being built by Lou Capelli with his partner RXR. And these are the 2 Clinton Place projects, the 2 towers on Huguenot Street, and the Standard, which is across from New Rock City, along with its sister building that's going up. I'll call it the number 2 Standard, which will be a 28-story high-rise. And I'd like to compare these 6 luxury and market rate apartment projects to 5 deeply affordable housing projects, or 5 high-rise projects with deeply affordable housing. And these are the Lincoln Renaissance project, 2 projects on Garden Street, 11 and 26, and then 2 projects on Main Street near Center. Reverend Holder's project at 500 Main, and a new project that is going up at 455 Main Street, which is part of the Stella. So for those in New Rochelle, we're familiar with these high rises. They're 28 stories generally. And for those who might drive through New Rochelle on I-95, they're all clustered around the train station. So the Capelli projects, the 6 luxury apartment projects, will cost $700 million. And there will be 1,600 luxury and market rate apartments, and only 5% of them will be affordable to families earning 80% of the county AMI. The 5 affordable housing projects also cost $700 million, and there will be 1,200 apartments built, and 70% of them will be affordable to families that earn, on average, 60% AMI. So in order to incentivize these projects, the IDA granted $71 million using today's dollars in tax breaks for the Capelli projects. $29 million were upfront. They got the money when they started construction or started development, and that's the sales tax exemption. and the mortgage recording tax exemption. And then they got 15 to 20 years of tax abatement. And the tax abatement under pilot in today's dollars is worth $42 million. And roughly it's $4 million a year in tax abatement. The 5 affordable housing projects are producing 1,200 apartments, of which 830 are affordable, or 70%. And the tax breaks that they get are $23 million upfront, and in today's dollars, $68 million of subsidies in pilot projects. But the subsidies run for 30 to 40 years. So, and here too, the pilot annual subsidies are $4 million. So the results are over $150 million of tax breaks, 2,000 luxury and market rate apartments, and less than 1,000 affordable. So the point is that the huge tax breaks are given out without any regard to the real objective or the stated objective of the IDA and its ability to provide tax relief, and that's to provide affordable housing. And local New Rochelle residents know that the affordable housing is segregated from the luxury housing and from the market rate housing. In terms of the jobs that were promised, the 6 Capelli and RXR projects promised that there would be 1,800 construction jobs, and the 5 affordable housing projects promised 1,200 construction jobs. Both of them calculated that 100 permanent jobs would be provided to manage the properties. So back to the IDA, and I would say that its goal has been to support the city council and the mayor's priorities of producing 10,000 units of housing. And they don't necessarily have priorities of providing local jobs, and it's not clear that they're providing affordable housing to local residents. And I say that because our clawbacks have not been demonstrated when it comes to the jobs, and it's not clear to me that, and there's nothing that's published that indicates how the IDA is going to guarantee that the promised affordable housing units are provided to local residents. So the Industrial Development Agency has the authority to provide tax breaks, but it's not clear that it's taking on the responsibility to enforce the quid pro quo from our developers. I wanted to say one more thing, and it's numbers oriented, but it has to do with another goal of the IDA, and that is to support the tax base. And by that, I think the intention is to tell residents that their taxes will not increase because of the subsidies provided to developers, and that we will have a sufficient tax base to support our schools. Greg mentioned the fact that most of the taxes that are paid support our local schools, and the IDA has done a good job of saying we only want development that will be for renters and small families. We do not want school children because we don't want to have to increase taxes for schools. Well, right now the IDA is finally reporting that they have provided $20 million in annual tax breaks. And this is before including any of the new projects. And from the 9 projects that I just reviewed with you, with us, the 6 luxury apartment projects and the 5 affordable housing projects, combined, those will represent $8 million in taxes that our schools, our municipal government services, and our county services will have to do without. And this does not include the 20 other projects. Most of them are not quite as big as these 9 projects, but there are 30 projects that have been approved in New Rochelle in order to reach that goal of 10,000 apartments. So we are well on our way to having $20, $30, $40 million in annual subsidies for mostly luxury and market rate apartment projects. And one last point is that the $20 million in subsidies right now, or tax breaks that are provided, represent about 6% of our total budgets for schools, county, and New Rochelle that are funded by property taxes. And if you add to it the 1/3 of the units that we discussed with the luxury apartments from Capelli and the 5 affordable housing projects, we're up to 9% of our tax base. And then when the city reaches its goal of 10,000 apartments in downtown, we're probably giving tax breaks to our developers representing 15% of our tax base. So these are very big numbers, and it's not clear that we are going to end up with what we're striving for, and that is local jobs, local permanent jobs at good wages, and housing opportunity for our local residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And again, most of you know that Anne has done a really great news article in New World News, and when I find the link, we'll put that in the chat as well. So we have a number of questions, but the first question that I wanted to ask our panelists was, what is the number one thing that you would think is important to have an effective community-focused IDA? There's one thing that we could rally around. What would that one thing be, if there is only one thing?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that because as I was listening to Lou talk about, the fact that we now have labor represented on the Westchester County IDA, a point that I wanted to make was that membership matters. Who sits on the IDA to ensure that the voices that are around the table are representative of the community? And so that means that that there should be school representation on an IDA. There should be labor representation on the IDA, and there should be small business representation on the IDA, at least as a way of making sure that those points are being represented in some kind of meaningful way.
Thank you, Joan.
I would like to say that we need our IDA to be independent of the development department, because the development department and the city managers, their goal is very clear. They want 10,000 rental apartment units. And so they run the IDA. The city manager is the chairman of our IDA, and the staff is the development department, Adam Salgado. And so they prepare, and they propose the benefits. They submit them to the board, and the board is supposedly picked by city council, and it can have a representative from schools. I don't think we have one from labor. There are small business representatives, but they are not independent of the city's development mission. So I would propose a number of ways to make the IDA board independent of the development department.
Thank you, Ann. Greg, Lou?
Go ahead, Lou.
Okay. So, as the labor guy here, I'm triggered to say, mandate prevailing wages, right? It's not cheap to live in New Rochelle. So just mandating that any construction workers on the site, make prevailing wages would help level the playing field. You have to understand the bidding process in construction. The lowest bidder gets the job, right? And I think of an astronaut that famously once said, "As I hurtled through space, one thought kept crossing my mind. Every part of this rocket was supplied by the lowest bidder," right? And his thoughts while he's traveling through space and worried about that, and I relate to that, right? In construction, it doesn't matter who's the most trained, who's the most skilled, what company has the safest record. The job goes to the lowest bidder, and that's a huge problem. So I'm triggered to say prevailing wages, but I think I would most likely say, if it was one thing, I think you got to get rid of all 7 IDAs, and you have to have regional IDA. Like Westchester County, it should just have the county IDA, and the county IDA handles every city, town, and village in Westchester County. I think that would level the playing field, because right now you have 7 IDAs in the county. And if you try to implement something on one, then developers will pick you off and they'll go run into Yonkers, or they'll go run into White Plains, and they'll hold on your property. And then, the mayor gets a lot of flack for projects stalled and stuff like that. So I think you got to get rid of all of them and just have one IDA in the county.
Thank you.
I'm so glad I waited for everybody else to go. So I second what everybody said with a few caveats. We're also very close to organized labor, I should add, and I'm a longtime labor activist myself. So I really like Lou's point about getting rid of the 7 duplicative IDAs. There's 5 in the Rochester area. There's 8 in the 2-county Buffalo metro area. This is nuts because they pirate each other. They get played off against each other. They get whipsawed. It's an invitation to structurally impoverish the public sector by giving the private sector too much power in that bargaining dynamic. So to level a playing field, 1 IDA per area makes total sense. I really endorse that. But let me count the other structural things here. Let's get back to the point. IDAs are not elected, right? And they were structured, and there's a whole raft of history of private sector consultants dating back to the 1950s advising governments to create these unelected bodies as a way to get things away from people power and to make them more abstract and obscure and aloof. And we're reaping the ill seed, crops of that seeded idea from a long time ago. Yes, prevailing wage, that's certainly within the power of the IDA. Some states have actually mandated it. Some states, like California, for redevelopment activities, has the equivalent of so-called Little Davis-Bacon that would apply not only to public construction works, but to publicly subsidized private construction activity. Pennsylvania, Oregon, a few other states and some metro areas. Totally appropriate way to improve local hiring and improve local ripple effects, to improve the benefits, the local benefits of these activities. There's a few other low-hanging fruits, but I'll leave it at those.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Well,
All right.
I'm sorry. I would say too, apropos of the unelected point, it's crazy that IDAs being unelected but appointed by executive branch officials typically, get to do this intergovernmental free lunch, right? Where most of the money that they're giving away is not lost to the city of which they are a body, it's lost to the school board. So you've got this intergovernmental free lunch thing going on. We think that's crazy. What can you imagine the school board taking a vote that says, okay, now you're going to have less money for police and fire and just go figure it out yourself how you're going to make do with that? Well, why do we allow the opposite to happen?
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a couple of questions in the chat. Miriam, I see your hands being raised, so I see you and we will get to you. Our first question, however, is are there any other municipalities that have leaders in using that have been leaders in using the leverage IDAs have? I think, Greg, you just gave us a couple, but
I mean, Westchester has done some things, and I don't know the location, but in the construction of an Amazon warehouse, for example, there was prevailing wage. There's been a couple of high-profile projects, but I don't know which of the 8 IDAs was involved. I know somebody involved a long time ago in one of these deals, but there's been a real dearth of leadership, frankly, among other IDAs, to my knowledge. There's lots of hot disputes right now, and that's one of the reasons why the Ryan Bronson bill has legs.
thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question was, are there any other municipalities that have been leaders in using the leverage IDAs have?
So, I mean, I'll jump in here. I think Putnam County had prevailing wage language put in. Putnam County has its own IDA. That was in effect for a very, very long time. And then apparently about a year and a half ago, the business community and lobbyists put a lot of money behind developers, and they were able to put a lot of pressure on elected officials to gut that prevailing wage language for a particular waterfront project. And that they succeeded, but I hear that it's back on the table and they're looking to put the prevailing wage law back in. I think Jersey City and some places in Jersey, so that's pretty local, also were effective in getting prevailing wage language. Here in the county, I would say the most successful IDA was probably the Westchester County IDA. George Latimer, like I mentioned before, in April of, I want to say 2020, implemented a couple of labor policies. He put into effect certified payroll, so that you could see what people are making, local hire requirements, and I wouldn't be able to quote you the percentages, but I think it was like 85% had to come from New York State. Then out of that, 35 or 40% had to be from Westchester County, and it was a whole breakdown of what local hire looks like on a county level. And then there was also safety training built in. Every worker had to have an OSHA 30, had to be scaffold trained to work on scaffolding. So I would say the county IDA here in Westchester probably has the best, but the problem is there's no clawbacks. We currently know several projects that are not in compliant, and the county's doing nothing about it.
New Rochelle added a requirement and a clawback provision in March of 2022 that said 15% of the total project cost, so that would be materials and labor, needs to come from either local hiring, union labor, or MWBE, businesses or labor. And if that threshold was not achieved, then the developer would pay $30 per square foot, prorated to the level of achievement, which is quite a big number if you've got a 300,000 square foot building. However, it's not clear whose responsibility it is to enforce that, and to go after the clawback.
A clawback with no teeth is not a clawback, right?
Well, and nobody to.
That's right, and it's almost as if there might.
Go ahead, Joan. Joan, go ahead.
Right, right. There is no one who is identified as taking on that task, and it's almost as if there's a fear in implementing it or enforcing it, and that was really the prevailing attitude for many years in Portchester, which hadn't had any major development in a number of years, at least since the waterfront development in the early 90s, and so certainly the community was had a need to increase its tax base, its assessables, in order to shore up, revenue. And so that was the sort of the guiding principle behind the transit-oriented development and form-based code that Portchester instituted and launched in 2020. But again, the clawbacks are, that's the devil is in the details. And without those, these are just words on paper.
Thank you, Joan. Okay, our next question, is there a way to change the AMI figure based on more local metrics, like a separate municipality or zip code? Does anyone know that answer?
Well, I think AMI is a federal term that HUD regulates. And HUD is the agency for housing and urban development that is on the decline. It really is just a regulatory body now, but they announce what the AMI is, and it's based on the county. So I don't think you can change it, but I think you can, you must be realistic and say that New Rochelle's AMI, at least it's reported by our finance director as being 77,000 for a family of 3. And for a family of 3 in Westchester, the AMI is probably 120,000. So I think there needs to be acknowledgement that the New Rochelle's median household income is only at 60% of the Westchester AMI. And so any affordable housing must be at the 60% level.
Thank you. All right, so we had a question in the chat that said, is there a better way to coordinate among communities? And I think we talked about that, that go to having regional as opposed to separate IDAs. So thank you for that question. The next question is, how do we stop the race to the bottom among municipalities competing in Westchester and across New York metro region to make as many concessions? Again, the idea of a regional, I think, answers that question. Creating a labor representative.
I'm going to put a link in the chat to Daphne on that as well, Lisa. There's a couple other models we can point to.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, creating a labor representative seems like a relatively low bar, assuming that they'd be outvoted when push comes to shove. Why has there been difficulty for municipalities to require this? I guess that's your question, Lou. What was the pushback for having a labor rep on an IDA board?
So, I could only, there's a lot of IDAs, right? So I can't speak for them all, but I could tell you what my experience was when I went to a Portchester IDA several years ago. I raised the question of a labor representative, and the answer that I got was that that would be a conflict of interest. And then I proposed a question, well, there's several IDA members here that own property in the downtown area that have a lot to gain from this development. Is that not a conflict of interest? And I pretty much was ushered out the building. So I would tell you that probably, depending on which IDA, they would give you a different answer.
If I could, I'm sorry, hypothetically speaking, I've heard the same answer, that it's a conflict of interest. And so I would welcome thoughts or guidance on how to rebut that question, hypothetically speaking, of course.
Yeah, and I would point them to, right, so the IDAs fall under Tom DiNapoli, right, the state comptroller's office. And if you go to his website, in the mission statement for IDAs, it says right there, they should be a labor representative on IDAs. And we could point to several areas. The county IDA has a labor representative, right? We were able to fill that with County Exec George Latimer when he got elected. But there's just, it's been difficult lobbying the rest of them. I would just leave it at that.
You know, when we were putting this together, we did reach out to Tom DiNapoli's office to see if they had, you know, kind of a community person come, you know, we pay his taxes that, you know, we pay his wages with our taxes. And they pointed us to, you know, kind of a regional economic development, but they did not have anyone to come and speak to regular community people. So maybe that's something we should work on too. Miriam, go for it. Come off mute and have your question.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This is really great information. It solidifies probably what we've all been feeling in terms of this whole process of IDAism and building buildings and this failed formula of this is how we're going to create affordable housing, which the governor just, you know, put more money into it. So listening to all of this, it just, you know, makes me boil even more, because it's like, even though we're hearing the details of this information, we know that we haven't been served the way we should have been served. And one, I think we need to take this information that you've given us and apply it specifically to New Rochelle to make some of these very much needed changes. For example, we have an overlay zone that has significantly effectively just removed the input from the citizens and the constituents. So that needs to be stopped. And it isn't that we haven't asked for this before, but everybody who, it seems, not everybody, but a lot of the people who are on these boards, who are put in these positions, aren't doing the people's work. They're doing the machinery and just moving forward to, you know, state the same rhetoric. And now we have to go through, you know, now new legislation going forward about how do we recoup some of this money for our schools, when we've been told all along, hey, you know, we have a Board of Ed member on the IDA. We've been having, I don't know who the person is now. I know the last person I remember was Amy. And it's been like, oh yeah, well, we're taking care of the schools. The schools are making money. They're making more money than what they've made before, when you know damn well that we're not making more money because the taxes are low.
Miriam, darling.
Yeah.
Where's your question?
So my question is, like, all of this information that's been shared is great to have the details, but we know that we're not being served the way we should be. And so you experts have been dealing with these things. How do we ensure that we do get served, people's benefits are served? Because how do we make that happen? Because right now, all that happens is that we talk about it and we know what the laws are, but the boards, our city government, our current mayor, who used to be our city council, just approves these things and has vowed to continue these same practices. And we just continue this. How do we change that?
That's part of this program, sweetheart. But okay.
I know. Well, I'm asking the experts, how do we really change that? Because it doesn't happen.
Okay. Thank you.
I would probably, if I can, could I address that?
Sure.
So I would say public awareness. There's just isn't enough public awareness. I think if you talk to your neighbors, you know, and you mentioned IDA, they probably wouldn't even know what that acronym means. We've been raising a lot of public awareness here in Westchester County. Labor officials been raising a lot of awareness in Putnam County as well. I think they did a study. Scoofus has a whole study on these IDAs, and he addresses the public awareness part. And I think it's like 10% of residents know about IDAs. And when you get away from Westchester or Putnam, it's even lower. It's damn near, 2% or 0% in some areas. So when you're talking about state, I think we're talking about state legislation. There has to be more public awareness statewide.
Can I
Thank
just add,
And if I
like
may,
the building?
if I may,
Hold
Right.
on a second. The building, like for example, here's a great example. Our county building, this new court building that we are building, since we're talking labor, right? And I thought it was horrible. This new building, we actually pat ourselves on the back that we've partnered with a privatized, a private company so that we don't have to hire union labor. It makes no sense because it's like, hey, county, you're actually the government. You should be setting the standard. We should be ensuring that we hire the union laborers. And you're sitting there happy that we're going to bypass it and build it cheaper because we're going to partner with a private company. This is what I'm saying when I say the
Yep.
people who are supposed to be supporting us don't. So how do we really make these changes?
Thank you, Mary.
So, I
And-
think one of the
and-
reasons we're having this panel is that there are 2 open seats on the IDA board. And of all the boards that are involved in approving development in New Rochelle, the planning board, the zoning board, they are appointed by city manager, the board members. The IDA board members are appointed by city council. And so in nominating and appointing board members, they cannot be the rubber stampers. They have to have particular expertise in hiring and good labor practices, and also understanding the legal mechanisms to claw back money from the developers when they don't meet the requirements. So we need a stronger IDA board, and we need appointees that have true qualifications that will serve and advocate for the community and that are independent from the whole development machine. And I think we have an opportunity now to ask our city council to appoint qualified advocates for our community.
Thank you, Ann. Joan, did
And
you?
if I may jump on that, and yeah, I just wanted to add to what Ann just said, right? It's about not asking, it's demanding, right? It's showing up at city council meetings or whatever the regulatory meetings are, and constantly calling that to question. It requires, the agency. We talked about that at the top of this meeting, defining what agency meant. And that is how you can use that term in terms of having folks show up to say that this is what we want and continually applying that pressure.
Thank you, Joan. All right, I see Shane and Bruce hand is up, but there's 2 questions in the chat that we're going to get to first, and then speed talking because we're approaching 9 o'clock. So the question was that, can any of the existing agreements with developers be revisited, or are we stuck? Again, I think that speaks to the clawbacks that we've been talking about and how we can and oversight.
Well,
Clawback.
New Rochelle
Yeah.
IDA feels that it has discretion to deviate from its policies. And for instance, in just last year, in March, they changed the UTEP program so that developers can come back and say that their interest rates increased and their costs increased. So they would need deeper pilots. Well, when these developers come back for more tax breaks, which they all do, or for the right to sell their projects, that's when the newer hiring requirements should be revisited. And I don't think developers should automatically get a pass when they haven't proven that they've done what they were supposed to do, or that they said they were going to do to begin with.
Thank you, Anne. Our next question was, so much of this seems to be dependent on private developers. Have there been any municipal buildings with public resources? Not that I'm aware of.
I mean, I think you're always going to depend on private building companies, contracting companies to build stuff, whether it's a bridge, or a private developer is going to hire a private construction company to build a private, luxury apartment complex. So it's not like you're going to, I'm not aware of anybody building a public construction department. But the point here is there's so many layers of subsidization. You all have rights to demand lots more community benefits. We'll just leave it at that because there's people waiting to answer questions.
Okay. Shane, I saw your hand first, and then Bruce.
Hi, so we'll start with full disclosure. I'm on the New Rochelle City Council. And I've been having this conversations about IDAs far before I even thought of being on council. A lot of my conversations have been with Michael Yellen. I believe, and were we speaking about you? I don't know if Michael and I were speaking to you about doing the research on IDAs at the state level, but we've been speaking to a few people about it because back when I was getting into contracting and looking at the possibility of municipal contracting, I saw IDAs as a blank check. I was like, oh my God, it's monopoly. It's like community trust, especially for a contractor or a consultant that would come in afterwards after the payment in the lieu of the taxes is made. But one of the early problems that I identified, besides the selective nature of how contracts even go out, and playing MWBEs against union labor, one of the biggest concerns that I saw, and I'd like answers on all of these, and if you guys could present to our city council, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, for if I'm overstepping, but I'd really like that for all of us. Something that I've always tried to figure out is how do you prevent IDAs from playing off of each other? I think I had this discussion with Damon, and he was saying that, we tried having the representative on the county level. Damon, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had a representative on the county level for a year from unions, and then developers basically just waited that out. And we were talking earlier about, well, if you do something on one city's IDA, the developers will play the cities off of each other and go work or do projects in another city. So my question is, ultimately, how do we advocate to the state with any type of velocity to get stronger language around IDAs so that they can't be played off of each other and so that the standards are set? And how do we do that when we have a lot of state level elected officials that are getting hate to bring it up, but love to bring it up.
Garland, we are getting close to time.
Sorry. Yeah. How do we prevent that conflict of interest between cities by advocating to the state? I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Sorry. Took some framing.
My short answer would be statewide legislation. That would affect all IDAs.
Amen.
Thank you.
But how do we get that from state elected officials that are getting money from developers?
This is not, you asked for a question, they gave you an answer, and you have their information and you can follow up with them, but we have one minute. Bruce, go for it.
I think my question's been answered, so I'm going to pass.
Oh, bless you. Okay. So,
Bruce.
this has been such a great conversation, and even though we've been rushing because 9 o'clock is when we normally end, it's not our last conversation. So thank you for your input. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to our panelists. You've been fabulous. And now that we found you, we will probably never let you go. But, And thank you, Noor, for once again coming together and having conversations that help us all see where there are foots of oppression, see where there are things that can change, and having a conversation about how we do that with our neighbors and our friends and moving forward. So as the saying goes, you don't have to go home. You have to leave here. This has been recorded. We will put it up on one of our YouTube sites and share it with it will be in Newer News. So please look at Newer News, and we will have the link there for those who want to see it. And again, if you want to connect with anybody, please contact us as newroar1@gmail.com. Is that what is our email? If someone could put our newer email in the chat so that everyone can have it, that would be great. Jocelyn, you can stop the recording, I think. And everyone, this has been really, really great. And thank you, Joan. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Lou. And thank you, Anne. Especially Anne, because it's like midnight where she is for being